In 2005, on the Diamir Glacier at the foot of Nanga Parbat, human remains emerged from beneath the melting ice. Bones, scraps of clothing, a boot. For 35 years, this mountain had kept a body inside itself, like a piece of evidence that cannot be forged. DNA analysis confirmed what one man on Earth had been repeating for 3.5 decades, and no one believed him. It was Günther Messner, the younger brother of Reinhold Messner, who perished during the descent down the Diamir face in June of 1970. The mountain had finally spoken, and it told the truth. But to understand why that truth mattered, you have to go back 35 years, to the summit where two brothers stood together, and to the descent from which only one returned. The Vilnoas Valley in South Tyrol is the Italian part of the Alps where German is heard more often than Italian, where wooden houses stand on forested slopes, and above them rise the Dolomite walls, pale and sharp as blades. Here, in the village of St. Peter in 1944, Reinhold Messner was born, and 2 years later, in 1946, his younger brother, Günther. There were 9 children in the Messner family altogether. Their father, Josef Messner, was a strict man, a teacher by profession, who raised his children in a spirit of discipline and self-reliance. Their mother, Maria, kept the house. The mountains began right outside the door, literally. The Dolomites were not a dream, not a hobby, not some distant adventure. They were the backyard. Reinhold started climbing rocks at the age of 5. His father took him on easy routes, and the boy, by his own account, immediately felt that rock was his element. Günther followed, the younger brother who always trailed the older one, first along the paths above the village, then on the rock routes of the Dolomites, then higher and farther. There were 2 years between them, but in the mountains that gap shrank. Günther was strong, resilient, and technically gifted as a climber, not the shadow of his older brother, but a full-fledged partner. By the end of the 60s, both brothers were among the top climbers in South Tyrol. Reinhold had already completed a series of extremely difficult ascents in the Alps, including first ascents on walls that were considered impossible. Günther was right there beside him, not on every expedition, but often enough that people saw them as a rope team. 2 brothers, 1 rope, 1 goal. They understood each other without words, the way only people can who have shared the same passion and the same risks since childhood. Günther was the quieter one. Reinhold was ambitious, outspoken, able to articulate his ideas in a way that made the world listen. Günther was reserved, dependable, a man who preferred action to words. In any rope team, there is the one who leads and the one who belays. Reinhold led. Günther belayed. But that does not mean Günther was weaker. It means he chose a different role, and in that role, he was irreplaceable. Nanga Parbat. 8,126 meters, the 9th highest peak in the world, the first 8,000er if you count from the west. A traveler flying from Europe to the Himalayas would see it before any of the other giants, but Nanga Parbat is not just about altitude, it is about reputation. The Germans called it Schicksalsberg, the mountain of destiny, but by 1970, a more accurate name was the Killer Mountain. Before Hermann Buhl's first successful ascent in 1953, the mountain had claimed 31 lives. The 1934 expedition lost 9 people, 3 climbers and 6 porters, in a single storm. The 1937 expedition lost 16. Nanga Parbat did not kill by accident, but systematically. Avalanches, storms, cold, altitude, everything working at once like a perfect machine of destruction. But this was precisely the mountain that attracted people who wanted not just to climb, but to do what no one had done before. And it was on this mountain that, in 1970, an expedition was conceived that would change the history of mountaineering and destroy one family's life. Karl Maria Herrlichkofer was a German physician and expedition organizer, a man whose connection to Nanga Parbat was almost mystical. His half-brother, Willy Merkel, had died on this mountain in 1934, and Herrlichkofer turned Nanga Parbat into his life's mission. He organized the 1953 expedition in which Hermann Buhl made the first solo ascent of an 8,000er without supplemental oxygen, without a partner, in a 41-hour marathon from the last camp to the summit and back. Buhl became a legend. Herrlichkofer became the organizer who brought the legend to the mountain. There were lawsuits between them afterward, accusations, a falling out. But Herrlichkofer kept coming back to Nanga Parbat. In 1970, his target was the Rupel face, the south face of Nanga Parbat, the highest rock wall in the world, 4,500 meters of vertical relief. No one had ever climbed it. The numbers alone were dizzying. Imagine a vertical wall 4.5 kilometers high, coated in ice, blasted by wind under constant threat of avalanche. And you do not just have to climb it. You have to climb it and come back alive. Herrligkoffer assembled a team. Among those invited was Reinhold Messner, a 25-year-old Tyrolean already known for his bold ascents in the Alps. Reinhold brought Günther along. His younger brother was 23. The expedition numbered around 20 members, climbers, scientists, photographers. Among them were Peter Schultz, Gerhard Bauer, Felix Kuhn, Werner Heim, Max von Kienlin, and others. It was a classic siege-style expedition of the era, a base camp, a chain of intermediate camps, fixed ropes, a gradual push upward. Herrligkoffer directed operations from base camp. He was not a high-altitude climber and never went up the wall. The plan was clear. A team of the strongest climbers would make a summit bid via the Ruppel face, reach the top, and return by the same route. Descend the way you went up. It was logical, safe as climbing an 8,000er by an uncharted route can ever be. But on a mountain, plans only last until the first unforeseen circumstance. June 27, 1970. Camp 5, at an altitude of roughly 7,400 meters. Reinhold Messner is ready for the summit push. According to Herrligkoffer's plan, the summit team was supposed to be Reinhold and Peter Schultz, climbing as a pair, protecting each other. But Schultz feels unwell. Altitude sickness, headache, nausea, weakness will not release him. He cannot go. Reinhold makes a decision that will be debated for decades. He will go alone, without a partner, without a rope on the final stretch, without protection. One man against 4.5 kilometers of vertical wall that no one has ever climbed. But he does not go entirely alone. Günther, who is at a lower camp, at Camp 4, or somewhere between 4 and 5, sees that his brother has set off for the summit, and he makes his own decision. He climbs after him. Without prior arrangement, without a plan, driven by anxiety for his brother, or by the desire to share the moment with him, or simply by the instinct of a younger brother who has spent his whole life following the older one. Reinhold ascends the Ruppel face. The climb takes the entire day, endless hours at the edge of physical ability, at an altitude where every breath delivers half the oxygen you would get at sea level. He reaches the summit, 8,126 meters, the first ascent of Nanga Parbat via the Ruppel face in history. He stands on top and sees a figure climbing toward him. It is Günther. Two brothers meet on the summit of Nanga Parbat, a moment that should have been a triumph and became the beginning of a tragedy. The problem revealed itself immediately. Günther was in bad shape. The climb from the lower camp to the summit had drained every last ounce of his strength. Altitude sickness is a treacherous thing. It can strike suddenly, even a well-prepared climber. The symptoms escalate, first a headache, then disorientation, then cerebral edema, which without an immediate descent ends in death. Günther, according to Reinhold, was disoriented. He could not coordinate his movements. Snow blindness, another enemy of altitude, had robbed him of his sight. He could not see where to place his feet. A descent down the Ruppel face, retracing the route of the ascent, would have been the logical choice. Fixed ropes were in place, camps were set up. Other expedition members were waiting. But the Ruppel face is 4.5 kilometers of vertical terrain, extremely technical climbing, ice sections that demand full coordination and clear vision. For someone in Günther's condition, that descent was impossible. He simply could not have climbed down the wall he had climbed up. And here Reinhold makes a second decision that would define the rest of his life. Instead of the Ruppel face, they would descend the Diamir face. The other side of the mountain, the western side, less steep, technically less demanding, but completely unfamiliar. Neither brother had ever been on the Diamir face. There were no fixed ropes, no camps, no supplies of food, water, or fuel, no one who could help. Two men on the summit of an 8,000er, one of whom can barely stand, choosing a descent into the unknown because the only alternative is even worse. A night on the summit. Reinhold and Günther bivouac at around 8,000 meters without a tent, without sleeping bags, with minimal gear. The temperature drops below -30. Wind, darkness. Every hour at that altitude without shelter drains strength that can never be recovered. Frostbite begins immediately and irreversibly. Reinhold would lose 7 toes, amputated after his return. At dawn on June 28th, the brothers begin descending the Diamir face. It is terra incognita, uncharted territory. Reinhold goes first, trying to find a safe route down a wall he is seeing for the first time in his life. Günther follows, slowly, struggling, losing strength with every step. The altitude sickness does not relent. The snow blindness does not lift. He depends on his brother entirely, on Reinhold's eyes, on his decisions, on his hands helping him through the difficult sections. The descent lasts all day. Then another day. The brothers make their way down the Diamir face, across ice fields, over rock sections, through avalanche-prone couloirs. Without food, without water, only snow they can melt in their mouths. Without sleep, without rest, because to stop means to die. Reinhold would later describe this descent as the most terrifying days of his life. He was carrying not just himself, but the responsibility for a brother who could no longer make decisions on his own. And then, the moment Reinhold Messner would relive every day for decades. They had descended to the base of the Diamir face. They had almost made it out. The Diamir glacier stretched before them, still dangerous. Crevasses everywhere, ice falls, but no longer a wall, no longer vertical. Reinhold moved ahead to scout the route, to find a safe passage through the icefall. He left Günther alone, for a few minutes, maybe half an hour, maybe an hour. He himself cannot remember exactly, because by that point his own mind was clouded by exhaustion and oxygen deprivation. When he came back, Günther was gone. Reinhold searched for him. He called out. He circled the glacier. He found tracks that ended at the edge of an avalanche deposit. An avalanche, fresh, massive, covering an enormous area of the glacier. Somewhere beneath tons of snow and ice lay his younger brother. Günther Messner died on June 29, 1970. He was 23 years old. Reinhold continued the descent alone. With frostbitten feet, dehydrated, exhausted, he reached a village at the foot of the mountain. Local villagers found him, helped him, got him to a hospital. 7 toes were amputated, but the physical wounds were nothing compared to what awaited him. He returned to civilization and walked straight into a storm that would not die down for 35 years. The first thing Reinhold encountered was not sympathy, not admiration for the first ascent of the Rupel face, but accusations. Members of the expedition, led by Max von Kienlen and others, began saying the thing that destroys a person from the inside out. He abandoned his brother. He left Günther on the mountain for the sake of glory. He could have gone back down the Rupel face, but chose the Diamir face, not to save Günther, but for his own record, to be the first to traverse Nanga Parbat from one face to the other. Herrligkoffer backed this version. There had been friction between him and Reinhold even before the expedition. Messner was too independent, too ambitious, too defiant for a leader accustomed to absolute control. After the tragedy, Herrligkoffer presented his version of events, in which Reinhold's decision to descend the Diamir face was not the forced rescue of a sick brother, but an act of selfish adventurism. The opponent's version went like this. Günther was not so badly off that he could not have descended the Rupel face. There were fixed ropes on the wall, camps, people ready to help. The descent down the Rupel face was difficult but feasible. The decision to take the Diamir face, uncharted, unequipped, without support, was madness that cost Günther his life. And Reinhold made that decision. Max von Kienlen claimed he saw 2 figures climbing back up toward the Rupel face, supposedly the Messner brothers having changed their minds about the Diamir descent. If true, it meant Reinhold was lying, that Günther was not so sick he could not have climbed back up. If untrue, it meant von Kienlen was lying, or mistaken, which at 7,000 meters is entirely possible. A war of competing accounts began, one that would last for decades. Lawsuits, publications, interviews, accusations, counter-accusations. The Messner family split apart. Some relatives sided with Reinhold, some did not. Their mother, who had lost a son, found herself caught between 2 truths, neither of which could be verified. The only witness to what happened on the Diamir face was the mountain itself, and the mountain said nothing. Reinhold Messner did not stop. He kept climbing, with a ferocity that could have been a flight from pain, an attempt to justify his brother's death, or simply what he was by nature, a man who could not stop going to the mountains. In 1978, he made the first ascent of Everest without supplemental oxygen, together with Peter Habeler. The global mountaineering community considered it impossible. Doctors had warned that without supplemental oxygen above 8,000 meters, the human brain suffers irreversible damage. Messner and Habeler proved them wrong. In 1980, he went further. A solo ascent of Everest, without oxygen, without a partner, by a new route from the north. 3 days of complete solitude at an altitude where the air holds a third of the oxygen, and any mistake means death with no witnesses. In 1986, he became the first person in history to summit all 14 8,000ers on the planet. Every peak above 8,000 meters, from Annapurna to Shishapangma, from K2 to Lhotse, had been climbed, a record that at the time seemed like the absolute limit of human capability. But behind every ascent, every record, every interview, there was always the same question, asked again and again. What happened on Nanga Parbat? What happened to Günther? Why did you take the Diamir face? Reinhold gave the same answer. Every time, for decades. Günther was sick. The descent down the Rupel face was impossible. The Diamir face was the only chance. An avalanche took him. I could not save him. I tried. I lost my brother on a mountain that has been killing people since the 1930s. They did not believe him. Not everyone, but enough people that the accusation became part of his biography. The greatest mountaineer of the 20th century, and a man who may have abandoned his brother on a mountain. 2 lines in the same paragraph, inseparable, like a rope team on a wall. The years passed. Herrligkoffer died in 1991, but the dispute did not die with him. Books, documentaries, articles in mountaineering journals, the subject would not close. In 2001, Reinhold Messner filed a lawsuit against Max von Kienlen and Hans Saal over their accusations. The court in Munich ruled in Messner's favor, banning the repetition of certain claims, but a court ruling is not the same as truth. His opponents continued to insist on their version, and then the mountain spoke. Summer of 2005. The Diamir Glacier, the very glacier the brothers had descended 35 years earlier. Glaciers are not static objects. They move, they flow like rivers of ice, only slower. They swallow everything that falls on them, rocks, equipment, bodies, and carry it downward inside themselves, meter by meter, year by year. And then, when the ice melts, they give it back. A glacier returns what it took, but not where it took it, lower, sometimes kilometers lower, and not when it took it, but years later, decades later. An expedition led by Reinhold Messner himself discovered remains on the Diamir Glacier. Bones, scraps of clothing, a boot, the model matching what Günther had worn in 1970. The location of the find was the lower part of the Diamir face, exactly where Reinhold had always said Günther was caught by the avalanche. DNA analysis was conducted in Innsbruck. Samples were compared with DNA from the Messner mother and other family members. The result was unequivocal. It was Günther Messner. The significance of this discovery was enormous. First, the body lay on the Diamir side of the mountain, not the Rupel side. This meant the brothers had indeed descended the Diamir face, as Reinhold had always claimed. Second, the location of the find corresponded to the avalanche danger zone at the base of the wall, exactly where Reinhold said the avalanche struck. Third, the very fact that the body was at such a low elevation indicated that Günther had descended a very long way down, nearly off the mountain. This was incompatible with the version that the brothers had turned around and headed back toward the Rupel face. For 35 years, Reinhold Messner had repeated the same story. For 35 years, people did not believe him. And then the glacier, that silent witness, produced evidence that cannot be forged, cannot be challenged, cannot be interpreted any other way. Günther was where Reinhold said he was. He died the way Reinhold said he died. He was not abandoned on the Rupel face. He was beside his brother until the very end. But even after this, the disputes did not entirely cease. Max von Kienlen and others continued to press on the details. Perhaps the brothers did indeed descend the Diamir face, but was Günther's condition really so critical that descending the Rupel face was impossible? Perhaps Reinhold exaggerated his brother's illness to justify his choice of route. Perhaps he chose the Diamir face not because there was no other option, but because he wanted to traverse the mountain, ascend one side, descend the other, and make history. These questions cannot be answered. The only person who could have confirmed or denied Günther's condition was Günther himself. And Günther had been lying in the ice for 35 years. Reinhold Messner responded to the discovery of the body the way a man responds who has carried that weight for half his life. He said, "I can finally bury my brother, not figuratively, literally." For 35 years, the family had no body, no grave, no place to go and light a candle. Now there was. The remains of Günther Messner were reinterred in South Tyrol, near the place where he grew up, among the Dolomite peaks he had seen from his window every day of his childhood. The 23-year-old climber who stood on the summit of Nanga Parbat beside his brother in June of 1970 had finally come home. What remained after all of it? Reinhold Messner lived a long and extraordinary life. After his mountaineering career ended, he became a writer, the author of dozens of books about mountains, expeditions, and the philosophy of risk. He became a politician, a member of the European Parliament. He created the Messner Mountain Museum series in South Tyrol, dedicated to mountains and the relationship between humans and nature. One of those museums stands on the ruins of Juval Castle, high above the Vinschgau Valley, and from its windows you can see glaciers retreating year by year, like the Diamir Glacier that held Günther's body for 35 years. But when Reinhold is asked about Nanga Parbat, his voice changes. The man who stood on the summits of all 14 8,000ers, who climbed Everest solo, who crossed Antarctica and Greenland, this man still returns to one and the same moment, the base of the Diamir face, a fresh avalanche deposit, and Günther is gone. He wrote a book about it, The Naked Mountain, published in 2003, 2 years before the body was found. In it, he described those days on Nanga Parbat in detail, hour by hour, the ascent of the Rupel face, meeting Günther on the summit, the decision to descend the Diamir face, the night at altitude with no shelter, the endless descent, and the moment he realized his brother was gone. The book reads like a confession, not because Reinhold was guilty, but because he survived and Günther did not. And that is something you cannot live with, but you cannot die from it either. In 2010, the feature film Nanga Parbat, directed by Joseph Vilsmeyer, was released based on the events of 1970. The film showed both brothers, the living Reinhold who cannot stop climbing, and the dead Günther who remains forever 23. The film did not answer the question of who was right, because by that point, the mountain had already given the answer. Günther Messner lived 23 years. A significant part of them he spent in the mountains beside his brother, on a rope that bound them both physically and metaphorically. He never got the chance to become what he might have become. He never got to conquer his own summits, write his own books, live his own life. All that remains are a few photographs of a young man with soft features and a calm gaze, and the summit where he stood for the last time. His story is not a story about a mistake. It is a story about choices that must be made at the edge of human capability, when there are no good options, only bad ones and very bad ones. Descending the Rupel face with a sick brother, a bad option. Descending the Diamir face without gear, without a map, without support, a very bad option. Staying on the summit, death. Splitting up, also death. Reinhold chose what seemed to him the least deadly. He was wrong, not in his choice, but in the sense that at such altitude, in such conditions, any choice can turn out to be the last. Nanga Parbat stands where it has always stood. 8,126 meters have not become a single centimeter lower. The Rupel face still rises 4.5 kilometers, a gigantic curtain of rock behind which lies one of the most tragic stories in the history of world mountaineering. And the Diamir Glacier still flows downward, retreating year by year, giving back what it once took. For 35 years, that glacier carried inside itself the body of a 23-year-old climber from South Tyrol. For 35 years, his older brother lived under an accusation more terrifying than any mountain. And when the ice finally retreated and the truth came to the surface, it turned out that Reinhold Messner had been telling the truth all along. But the 35 years of his life spent under the shadow of that accusation cannot be returned. Just as Günther cannot be returned, there are questions the mountains do not answer. What did Günther feel in his final hours? Did he understand what was happening through the fog of altitude sickness and snow blindness? Did he hear his brother's voice when Reinhold called for him after the avalanche? Or, by that point, was it already over, instant, painless, beneath tons of snow? We do not know, and we never will. But we know one thing. Two brothers from a small village in South Tyrol climbed together to the summit of one of the most dangerous mountains on the planet. They stood there together at an altitude where the world of humans ends and the world of rock, ice, and indifferent sky begins. And one of them did not come back. This is the story of Günther Messner, the younger brother, the man who followed the older one, all the way to the end. Yasuko Namba. The last 300 meters. 300 meters, just 300 meters stood between her and survival. 3 football fields. A distance a healthy person covers on flat ground in 4 minutes. But at an altitude of 8,000 meters, in total darkness, with winds of 120 kilometers per hour and temperatures of -40, 300 meters becomes an impassable abyss. On May 10, 1996, Yasuko Namba lay on the icy plateau of the South Col, and life was draining from her with every beat of her slowing heart. She had conquered all 7 highest summits on every continent. She had become the oldest Japanese woman to stand on top of the world. She had accomplished what most people don't even dare to dream of, and she perished 300 meters from the tent that could have saved her. This is the story of a woman who gave the mountains everything, and the mountains gave her nothing in return. Yasuko Namba was born on February 2, 1949, in a small town on the island of Honshu, Japan. A post-war nation rising from the ashes, undergoing one of the most rapid economic booms in history. An ordinary Japanese middle-class family, where children were raised in traditions of hard work, discipline, and respect for elders. Little Yasuko stood out from an early age with 2 qualities that would define her entire fate: absolute stubbornness and a quiet but indestructible passion for nature. In school, she didn't stand out for her height or physical abilities. Petite, quiet, reserved, a typical Japanese girl from a good family. But behind that modest exterior hid a character that neither mountains nor storms nor societal expectations could break. Yasuko fell in love with hiking early on. Japan is a land of volcanoes and mountain ranges, and for a young woman from the provinces, the mountains became a space of freedom, the only place where she truly felt like herself. After university, Yasuko earned a degree in business administration and entered the corporate world. In late 1960s Japan, building a serious career as a woman was nearly impossible. Society expected marriage, children, homemaking. Yasuko chose a different path. She landed a job at a major Tokyo corporation and began a slow but steady climb up the corporate ladder. A world of skyscrapers, business suits, and endless meetings. But every vacation, every long weekend, she escaped to the mountains. The mountains were her real life. The office was just a way to fund it. Colleagues remembered her as a quiet, exceptionally organized person who never raised her voice and never deviated from the plan. She was the first to arrive at the office and the last to leave. She never talked about her climbs unless asked, never boasted. She simply did what she believed needed doing, whether at the office or on the mountain. Yasuko's first serious climbs came after 30. For alpinism, that's a late start. Most professionals begin scaling rocks as teenagers. But Yasuko wasn't fazed. She approached the mountains the same way she approached her career, methodically, consistently, with iron discipline. Her physical stats impressed no one, barely 5 feet tall, weighing around 110 pounds. But what she lacked in strength and stature, she made up for with endurance, patience, and a will that was simply unbreakable. In the mid-80s, when Yasuko was past 35, she learned about the 7 Summits program, the quest to climb the highest peak on each of the 7 continents. The idea was popularized by the American Dick Bass, who became the first to complete the program in 1985. For Yasuko, this wasn't a dream. It was a plan, specific, measurable, like a quarterly report. There's a goal, there are milestones, there's a deadline, just like in business. She began methodically collecting summits. Kilimanjaro in Africa, 5,895 meters. Elbrus in Europe, 5,642 meters. Aconcagua in South America, 6,961 meters. Denali in North America, 6,190 meters. Vinson Massif in Antarctica, 4,892 meters. Kosciuszko in Australia, 2,228 meters. Each climb meant months of preparation, thousands of dollars, and weeks of vacation that Yasuko saved up with an accountant's precision. She kept working at the corporation, investing every spare dollar into expeditions. By the early 90s, Yasuko had 6 of 7 summits behind her. Everest remained, 8,849 meters, the death zone, a place where the human body begins to die regardless of preparation or equipment. Yasuko understood the stakes, but 6 summits out of 7 is like a marathon abandoned a kilometer before the finish line. Unthinkable, unacceptable, not for someone with her character. Yasuko Namba didn't know the word retreat. It simply didn't exist in her vocabulary, like a meaningless string of sounds with no significance. Her first attempt on Everest came in 1993. Weather and lack of time forced a turnaround before the summit. She was 44. Age, gender, petite frame. Everything screamed that Everest wasn't for her. Yasuko didn't listen. She went back to training and started planning the next attempt. 3 years of waiting, preparing, and saving. 3 years during which Everest haunted her dreams every night. A white pyramid reaching into the stratosphere, unreachable and beckoning. She studied routes, read expedition reports, analyzed weather windows. She prepared the only way she knew how, systematically and mercilessly toward herself. In 1996, Yasuko signed up for the Adventure Consultants Expedition, a commercial operation run by New Zealander Rob Hall. Hall was 35 and already considered one of the best high-altitude guides in the world. 5 Everest summits, 39 clients guided to the top without a single loss. Rob Hall was selling a dream. For $65,000, he promised to lead any physically prepared person to the roof of the world. And his track record left no room for doubt. Yasuko paid everything. For her, this wasn't just an expedition. It was the final chapter of a decade-long odyssey, the 7th summit. If she made it, she would become the oldest Japanese woman to complete the 7 Summits program. She was 47. In the world of commercial mountaineering, that's a serious age. But Yasuko trained with manic dedication. Marathons, climbing walls, high-altitude acclimatization outings. She was ready, or she believed she was ready. Deep down, Yasuko understood this was most likely her last chance. At 50, another attempt would be even harder. Time was working against her, and she knew it. In the spring of 1996, Everest Base Camp resembled a small city. 26 expeditions, around 400 people, the most crowded season in the mountain's history. 2 commercial teams stood out from the rest. Rob Hall's Adventure Consultants and Scott Fisher's Mountain Madness, friends and rivals, both leading clients to the summit, both promising safety, both brimming with confidence. Hall's team had 8 clients, among them mailman Doug Hansen, making his second attempt after failing the year before. Journalist John Krakauer, on assignment from Outside Magazine to write a piece about commercial mountaineering. Socialite Sandy Pittman, filing reports for NBC Interactive. And Yasuko Namba, the quiet, unassuming, stubborn Japanese woman who had come here to finish the work of a lifetime. Acclimatization took weeks. Ascents and descents between camps, 6,000, 6,400, 7,300, 7,920. Yasuko handled the altitude hard. Her petite body suffered more than the larger bodies of the men. Headaches, loss of appetite, insomnia. But every morning she got up and walked. The guides noted she was the slowest on the team, but absolutely unyielding. When others complained, Yasuko silently pressed on. When others wanted to turn back, she kept climbing. That quiet resolve earned respect even from seasoned Sherpas, who had seen hundreds of clients. On May 9th, the teams of Hall and Fisher climbed to Camp 4 on the South Col, 7,920 meters, a flat, wind-blasted saddle between Everest and Lhotse, littered with debris from past expeditions. From here, the death zone begins. The plan? Depart around midnight. Climb the southeast ridge through the balcony, the south summit, the Hillary Step, and stand on the summit by noon. Hard deadline, 2 p.m. If you haven't made it, turn around. That was Rob Hall's golden rule, a matter of life and death. On May 10th, 1996, that rule would be broken, and the price would be monstrous. 8 people would pay for that night with their lives. Around midnight, 33 climbers began the summit push. A chain of headlamps slowly crawled up the ridge, like a string of lights on a black Christmas tree. The night was clear, the wind bearable. Nothing foreshadowed disaster. Yasuko climbed at her own pace. 1 step, 1 breath. 1 step, 1 breath. Above 8,000 meters, every movement costs superhuman effort. The oxygen mask helps, but doesn't save you. The air is thin, the brain runs in slow motion, muscles fail. Yasuko didn't rush. Over 10 years, she had learned the most important lesson. It's not about speed, it's about never stopping. At dawn, a problem emerged. The fixed ropes on key sections of the route hadn't been anchored. A coordination failure. No one knew whose Sherpas were responsible for setting them. Dozens of climbers piled up on narrow sections, waiting while guides manually secured the ropes. A delay of an hour and a half. Precious time that would be desperately missed later. Yasuko kept climbing. She passed the balcony, reached the south summit. Before her lay the final ridge, narrow as a knife's edge. To the left, a 2-kilometer drop toward Nepal. To the right, a 3-kilometer abyss down the Kangchenjunga face. Along this ridge, she had to cover the last stretch to the summit. Yasuko Namba reached the summit of Everest on May 10th, 1996. The exact time remains a matter of debate. According to various sources, somewhere between 2:30 and 3 in the afternoon, well past the established turnaround time. But in that moment, none of it mattered. She stood on the roof of the world, 8,849 meters, the 7th summit, the program complete. At 47, Yasuko became the oldest Japanese woman to conquer all 7 of the world's highest peaks. 10 years on the road, thousands of hours of training, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And there she stood, on the edge of the sky, where prayer flags fluttered in the wind and the horizon curved like a lens. Krakauer would later write that, on the summit, Yasuko looked exhausted but absolutely happy. She was crying. A tiny Japanese woman, barely over 5 feet tall, standing on top of the world and weeping with joy. She pulled a Japanese flag from inside her jacket and unfurled it into the wind. A moment of absolute triumph. But the triumph was already poisoned. The clock had long passed 2, and every minute on the summit brought the catastrophe closer. The descent began late. Too late. Yasuko was drained from the climb, oxygen supplies dwindling. Ahead lay the Hillary Step, the Traverse, the South Summit, the endless ridge back to the South Col. At this altitude, descending is no relief. It's a different form of hell. Exhausted legs buckle, concentration fades, every wrong step could be the last. And below, thousands of meters of void on both sides of the ridge. And that's when the weather broke. Barometric pressure plummeted. Clouds that had been swirling lower on the slopes all day crept upward. By 4 o'clock, the wind intensified. By 5, visibility dropped. By 6 in the evening, a cyclone slammed into Everest, one that meteorologists would call among the most powerful in recent decades. Yasuko was somewhere between the south summit and the balcony. She was descending with guide Mike Groom and several clients. The wind roared so loud it drowned out screams. Snow flew horizontally, clogging masks and goggles. Visibility, 0. Literally 0. Climbers couldn't see their own hands in front of their faces. Wind chill temperatures plunged to -70 Celsius. Somewhere above, near the south summit, Rob Hall was stranded with an exhausted Doug Hansen. Over the radio, he reported to base camp that Hansen couldn't move. He asked for help. Help wouldn't come. Rob Hall would spend the night above 8,000 meters and die there, beside his client. Around 9 in the evening, Groom's group made it onto the South Col. But in the pitch darkness and the storm, finding the tents proved impossible. The South Col is a flat expanse the size of 4 football fields, blasted by a hurricane. The tents were somewhere 300 meters away. Without visibility, without landmarks, In absolute darkness, the tents might as well have been on another planet. Here, Groom's group ran into lost clients from Mountain Madness: Sandy Pittman, guide Neil Beidelman, several others. Together, they huddled on the open ice, 10 to 12 people, 300 meters from life, and not one of them could cross those 300 meters. They lay down on the ice, pressed against each other. The wind knocked them off their feet. One by one, people lost consciousness. Yasuko was among the first. Her small body cooled faster than the larger bodies of the men. Every reserve of energy burned on the ascent. No strength, no warmth, no oxygen. She lay on her side, curled in the fetal position, trying to preserve the last scraps of heat. The icy wind blew the life out of her like a flame off a candle in a draft. Around her lay others, just as spent, just as helpless. Some were still moaning, others had already gone silent. Telling the living from the dead in that darkness was impossible. Around midnight, there was a brief clearing. The wind died for a few minutes, the clouds parted, and stars appeared. Beidelman, the guide, and Kangchenjunga, a client still on his feet, spotted the distant glow of the tents. They knew the direction, the decision. Those who could walk would go to camp for help. The rest would have to be left behind. Beidelman and Schoening led the ambulatory away. Left on the ice were Yasuko, Sandy Pittman, Beck Weathers, Hall's half-blind client, and several others. They were left to die. At 8,000 meters, in a storm, at -60, it was the only possible decision. The dead don't save the dead. But one man refused to accept it: Anatoly Bukreev, a Kazakhstani mountaineer and guide for Mountain Madness. That day, he had summited without supplemental oxygen and returned to Camp 4 ahead of everyone. He was criticized for it. Krakauer would accuse him of abandoning his clients. But precisely because Bukreev was in camp and relatively rested, he was able to do what no one else could. Learning that people were stranded on the col, Bukreev walked out into the storm, alone, without oxygen, in total darkness. He navigated by feel, fighting a wind strong enough to throw him off the mountain. He found the group, bodies on the ice, dusted with snow, nearly indistinguishable from rocks. He began dragging them out one by one. He hauled Pittman to the tent, went back and saved Charlotte Fox, went back again and pulled out another. 3 trips into hell and back, each one a feat at the very edge of human capability. In conditions where most people couldn't even stand, Bukreev was performing what would later be called one of the greatest rescue efforts in the history of high-altitude mountaineering. But Bukreev didn't reach Yasuko. She lay farther from camp, unconscious, her face covered in a crust of ice. Severe hypothermia, the kind you don't come back from at 8,000 meters. Even Bukreev, exhausted from 3 trips into the storm, couldn't save everyone. Yasuko was left alone on the ice of the South Col. Beck Weathers, left beside her, accomplished the incredible. The next day, May 11th, when the storm subsided, he somehow rose to his feet and stumbled toward camp. He suffered devastating frostbite, but survived. For Yasuko, there was no miracle. On the morning of May 11th, rescuers found her body on the ice. Yasuko Namba was dead, 47 years old, 300 meters from camp, a distance measured not in steps, but in the difference between life and death. That night, 8 people died on Everest: Rob Hall, the legendary guide who broke his own rule for a client; Doug Hansen, the mailman for whom this was the last attempt; Scott Fisher, the leader of Mountain Madness, who climbed while ill and froze on the descent; Andy Harris, the young guide who vanished in the darkness near the south summit; and Yasuko Namba, a quiet Japanese woman who simply wanted to finish what she had started 10 years before. The tragedy shook the world. Krakauer wrote Into Thin Air, a book that became a global bestseller and forever changed the perception of commercial mountaineering. Bukreev responded with The Climb, his own version of events: films, investigations, endless debates, and one question that haunts every survivor: could Yasuko have been saved? Bukreev did everything he could. 3 trips into the storm, 3 lives. A 4th was beyond his reach. If the ropes had been fixed on time, if there hadn't been a delay, if the clients had been turned around by the rule, Yasuko would have been back before dark. But at 8,000 meters, a chain of small decisions becomes an avalanche, and any mistake can be the last. Yasuko's family asked that the details not be sensationalized. In Japan, death is met with quiet restraint, but the story became the world's to know through books, films, and investigations. In 2015, the Hollywood film Everest recreated the events of that night on screen. The role of Yasuko was played by Japanese actress Naoko Mori. For millions of viewers around the globe, it was their first encounter with the story of a small Japanese woman who dreamed of 7 summits. Yasuko Namba lived in a country where women were assigned certain roles. She chose a corporate career and high-altitude mountaineering. She was older than most climbers on Everest, shorter, physically weaker, and she still made it to the summit. You could say her greatest virtue destroyed her. The inability to back down. The stubbornness that lifted her onto 6 summits wouldn't let her turn around when the hands of the clock had long passed 2. But can you blame a person for the very quality that made them great? On the summit of Everest, Yasuko spent only a few minutes. She unfurled the flag, let herself be photographed, and began the descent. She gave no grand speeches. She didn't shout with joy. She just quietly wept, like a person who had finally come home after a very long journey. Only the road home turned out to be infinitely longer than she'd imagined. Yasuko Namba's body remains on Everest. Every spring, hundreds of climbers pass by on their way to the summit, past tents, expedition debris, empty oxygen canisters, past those who stayed on the mountain forever, and among them, a small Japanese woman who conquered 7 summits of the world and lost her battle with 300 meters of frozen ground. 300 meters, 4 minutes on flat ground, an eternity at 8,000 meters, the distance between triumph and tragedy, between life and death, between memory and oblivion. Yasuko Namba walked her path to the end. She climbed all 7 summits. She never gave up, and in that lies her victory. Even if the last 300 meters remained uncrossed, and then the mountain claimed what was its own, as it had claimed before, as it will keep claiming after. On the 6th of October, 1995, at an altitude of 8,300 meters in the frozen silence of Kangchenjunga, contact was forever lost with a man who was closer than anyone in the world to his dream. One 8,000er, just one, the last, the 14th, stood between him and making history as one of the few who had conquered all the highest peaks on the planet. His name was Benoît Chamoux, a French mountaineer they called the meteor of high-altitude alpinism for his incredible speed of ascent, a man who climbed the rooftops of the world faster than anyone before him, and who vanished at the very moment when just a few hundred meters separated him from the fulfillment of his life's greatest goal. This is not simply a story about a tragic death in the mountains. This is a story about the line between ambition and fate, about how destiny can take everything away at the very instant when victory is already brushing your fingertips, and about the fact that mountains never offer guarantees, not even to the fastest, the most experienced, the most driven. Benoît Chamoux was born on the 28th of October, 1961, in Annecy, a picturesque city in southeastern France at the foot of the Alps. Annecy is often called the jewel of the French Alps, a city surrounded by mountains, with a crystal-clear lake and medieval streets. For a child who grew up in a place like that, mountains were not something exotic. They were everyday reality. Every day stepping out of the house, young Benoît would see snow-capped peaks, and those peaks called to him from the very beginning. The Chamoux family had no connection to professional mountaineering, but a spirit of adventure and a love for nature were part of their lives. Like many children in the alpine region of France, Benoît started skiing at an early age, went on hikes, and picked up the basics of rock climbing. But even as a teenager, it was clear he had something special, incredible physical endurance and an ability to adapt to exertion that left his peers completely broken. He did not just scramble up rocks, he did it with a kind of ease and speed that amazed even experienced instructors. By the age of 20, Chamoux was already a serious climber. He had completed classic routes in the Alps, summited Mont Blanc, and tackled technically demanding walls in the Mont Blanc Massif and the Dolomites. But Europe felt too small for him. He was drawn to the true giants, the Himalayas and Karakoram, mountains that rise above the clouds, where the air is so thin that every step becomes an act of will. In the mid-'80s, Benoît Chamoux made his first trip to the Himalayas, and it was there that his unique talent revealed itself. It turned out that his body possessed a remarkably rare ability to acclimatize at extreme altitudes. Where other climbers suffered agonizingly from altitude sickness, lost their strength, and were forced to set up intermediate camps, Chamoux felt relatively comfortable. His body seemed built to function in conditions of oxygen deprivation. But it was not just physiology. Chamoux developed his own approach to high-altitude mountaineering that was fundamentally different from the accepted norm. While most expeditions to 8,000ers lasted months, with lengthy acclimatization, a chain of camps, tons of gear, and oxygen bottles, Chamoux proposed a radically different path. Light, fast, minimalist, minimal gear, minimal time on the mountain, a lightning dash to the summit, and an equally rapid descent. This style would later be called Alpine style on 8,000ers, and Chamoux became its leading advocate and practitioner. The turning point in Benoît Chamoux' career came in 1988. That was when he pulled off an ascent that shattered everything people thought they knew about what was possible in high-altitude mountaineering. On the 11th of October, 1988, Chamoux reached the summit of Kangchenjunga, the third highest mountain in the world, 8,586 meters, in a record-breaking 23 hours from base camp. 23 hours, without supplemental oxygen, without intermediate overnight stops. One relentless push from the bottom to the top. That record stunned the climbing community. Before Chamoux, an ascent of Kangchenjunga was considered a matter of several weeks of grueling work. Even the strongest Himalayan climbers spent days moving between high camps. And here, 23 hours. It seemed like science fiction. The cruel irony was that Kangchenjunga, the mountain that gave him fame, would take his life 7 years later. But in 1988, no one was thinking about that. The world learned the name Benoît Chamoux, and that name became synonymous with speed and fearlessness in the mountains. After Kangchenjunga, the records came one after another. Chamoux methodically collected 8,000ers, and each of his ascents became an event. In 1990, he summited Everest in record time, less than 24 hours from advanced base camp to the top. He did not use supplemental oxygen. That was a matter of principle for Chamoux. He believed that real mountaineering meant a contest between a person and the mountain, one-on-one, without technical crutches. His ascents of Gasherbrum 1 and Gasherbrum 2, Broad Peak, Nanga Parbat, Manaslu, Lhotse, each was carried out in Chamoux' signature style, fast, light, elegant. He did not fix kilometers of rope, did not set up dozens of camps, did not hire an army of porters. He went light, with a minimal pack, and climbed the rooftops of the world as if they were Alpine 4,000ers. The French press adored him. Chamoux was not just a mountaineer, he was a star. Handsome, charismatic, with a bright smile and disarming charm, he was a perfect fit for the role of national hero. He was invited on television, magazines wrote about him, and his name was known to people who had nothing to do with the world of climbing. In France, he became a living legend, a symbol that the French spirit of adventure was alive and thriving. But behind the glamour was a man possessed. Benoît Chamoux was a perfectionist who set goals and pursued them with obsessive determination, and his ultimate goal gradually crystallized into a clear intention: to summit all 14 8,000ers on the planet. At that point, only a handful of people in the world had managed it. The legendary Reinhold Messner, who was the first to complete the collection in 1986, and a few other climbers. Chamoux wanted to become the first Frenchman to do it. By the early 90s, he was confidently moving toward that goal. One by one, the 8,000ers fell into his collection. Annapurna, Dhaulagiri, Makalu, Cho Oyu, Shishapangma. The list of conquered giants grew with every season. By 1994, Chamoux had 13 summits out of 14. 13, only one remained, and what a symbolic one it was. Kangchenjunga, the very mountain where his fame had begun, the very summit he had raced up in 23 hours back in '88. The circle was about to close, but Kangchenjunga had a reputation of its own, the third highest peak in the world, straddling the border of Nepal and the Indian state of Sikkim. Kangchenjunga had always been considered one of the most dangerous and unpredictable mountains in the Himalayas. Its name translates from Tibetan as 5 treasures of the Great Snow, for the 5 summits of the massif, Local people had long considered it sacred and believed the mountain punished those who tried to defile its peak. The statistics backed up the mountain's mystical reputation. The death rate on Kangchenjunga was among the highest of any 8,000er. Avalanches, ice falls, sudden blizzards, extreme temperature swings. The mountain seemed to deliberately create barriers for climbers. Even the most seasoned mountaineers treated it with a special kind of respect. Chamoux knew all of this better than anyone. After all, he had already stood on its summit. But being on the mountain during a speed ascent in good weather, when a young body is working at peak capacity, is one thing. Attempting the summit at 33, after years of punishment at extreme altitude, when the body has inevitably accumulated fatigue and the mountains forgive fewer and fewer mistakes, that is something else entirely. In the spring of 1995, Chamoux began preparing the expedition that was meant to be the crowning achievement of his entire career, the 14th 8,000er, the final summit, the triumphant conclusion to a grand project. He assembled a team that included several experienced French climbers and secured the backing of sponsors. Interest in his expedition was immense. All of France was waiting for the news of victory. In the autumn of '95, Chamoux' expedition arrived at the foot of Kangchenjunga. The route chosen was the southwest face, the classic approach that Chamoux knew well from his first ascent. The team began the standard acclimatization process, establishing intermediate camps and making forays to altitude before descending. Everything was going according to plan, but the weather was fickle. The autumn season on Kangchenjunga is always a gamble. The monsoon had already retreated, but the winter winds had not yet set in, and windows of good weather were short and unpredictable. The team waited for the right moment to make their summit push, and that waiting weighed on everyone, but especially on Chamoux himself. He was so close, 13 8,000ers behind him and just one ahead. Every day of waiting felt like an eternity. You can only imagine what was going on inside him: impatience, excitement, the awareness of a historic moment that was about to arrive. He was on the threshold of immortality, at least the mountaineering kind. His name was about to stand alongside Messner and the other Titans. On the 5th of October, 1995, the weather forecasts showed a brief window of good conditions. Chamoux made the decision to go for the summit. It was a risky call. The window was narrow, and at that altitude, weather can change in a matter of minutes. But the wait was dragging on. The expedition's resources were not unlimited, and Chamoux felt this was his chance. Perhaps the last chance of the season. On the 6th of October, early in the morning, Benoît Chamoux set out with several teammates for the final summit push. They left the upper camp, positioned at roughly 7,800 meters. Ahead of them lay another 800 meters of vertical gain, a distance that, at sea level, you could run in minutes, but above 8 kilometers, it becomes an hours-long battle for every single step. The group moved slowly upward. Conditions were brutal: bitter cold, cutting wind, deep snow. But Chamoux kept pushing forward with his characteristic determination. He knew this route, he knew this mountain, and he knew the summit was waiting for him. The last one, the 14th, the most important of all. As they gained altitude, the group began to spread out. This is normal at extreme heights. Everyone moves at their own pace, and the gap between the fastest and the slowest can be measured in hours. Some team members, realizing they could not continue, turned back. It was the right decision. At that altitude, trying to push through sheer willpower can cost you your life. But Chamoux kept going. He crossed the 8,000-meter mark and entered what is known as the death zone, the region where the human body cannot survive for long. At this altitude, oxygen pressure drops to just a third of normal, and the body literally begins to die. Brain cells perish, muscles fail, consciousness clouds over. Every minute spent in the death zone brings the end closer. The last radio contact with Benoît Chamoux came when he was at approximately 8,300 meters. He reported that he was feeling fine and continuing toward the summit. About 300 vertical meters remained. 300 meters. On an ordinary mountain, that is half an hour of easy walking. On Kangchenjunga, above 8 kilometers, it could mean 2, 3, 4 hours of agonizing ascent. But it was doable. The summit was within reach. And then the radio went silent. Chamoux did not check in after 1 hour, or 2, or 3. Base camp called him on the radio, again and again. Silence. The hope that he had simply climbed above the range of reception, that the radio had malfunctioned, that he had decided not to waste energy on communication. It gradually faded. The weather began to deteriorate. Clouds rolled in, the wind picked up, visibility dropped to just a few meters. The team at the lower camps was in a state of agonizing uncertainty. They did not know whether Chamoux had reached the summit. They did not know if he was alive. They did not know exactly where he was. The only thing they knew was that he was somewhere up there, in the death zone, in worsening weather, alone. Attempts to organize a rescue operation ran headlong into the brutal reality of high-altitude mountaineering. Above 8,000 meters, rescue is virtually impossible. Helicopters cannot fly that high. Other climbers at that altitude can barely move themselves. Carrying or dragging another person is physically out of the question. A search party that went out looking found no trace of Chamoux. No body, no gear, no footprints in the snow. The wind and snowfall had erased every mark. Days passed. Hope melted away like snow under the Himalayan sun. It became clear that Benoît Chamoux was not coming back. Something had happened up there, at 8,300 meters or higher, a fall into a crevasse, an avalanche, a sudden onset of altitude sickness, cerebral or pulmonary edema, frostbite, disorientation, total exhaustion, hypothermia, any one of dozens of causes that kill climbers at extreme altitude. The mountains left no clues, no evidence. The most agonizing question of all was this: did he reach the summit? Did Benoît Chamoux stand on his 14th 8,000er before he died? Did he touch his dream, even for an instant? Or did the mountain take him while he was still climbing, while the summit still loomed somewhere ahead, just out of reach? There is no answer, and there never will be. Kangchenjunga keeps its secret. The news of Chamoux's death shook France. The country had lost its hero, a man who embodied the spirit of adventure, courage, and the drive to achieve the impossible. Newspapers ran morning headlines. Television devoted special programs to his memory. The President of France expressed condolences to his family. Benoît Chamoux was not just a climber. He was a national treasure, and his loss was felt as a personal tragedy by millions of French people. But for the mountaineering community, his death carried an even deeper resonance. It raised hard questions about the price of ambition in the mountains. Chamoux was one of the strongest high-altitude climbers in the world. He knew Kangchenjunga. He had already climbed it. He was experienced, prepared, motivated. And still the mountain took him. If even someone like that was not safe, then who is? Many wondered whether the very proximity of the goal had played a fatal role. Whether the awareness that just one step remained before completing the project of a lifetime had led him to make too risky a decision. Whether impatience had caused him to ignore the signals from his body, the weather, his intuition. This is the eternal dilemma of mountaineering, the moment when determination crosses into obsession, and the dream of the summit clouds the instinct of self-preservation. We do not know whether Chamoux made a decision that day that he would never have made under normal circumstances. We do not know whether he kept going forward when the wiser choice would have been to turn back. We do not know whether his dream of the 14th summit made him cross a line that should never be crossed. But we do know that the pressure, psychological, emotional, public, was enormous. All of France was waiting for his victory. Sponsors had invested money. Cameras were pointed at the mountain. And he himself, Benoît Chamoux, wanted to finish what he had started more than anyone. The story of Benoît Chamoux fits into a broader context of tragedies linked to the race for all 14 8,000ers. That race, launched by Messner in the 70s and 80s, had by the 90s turned into a kind of competition among elite climbers. Who would be second after Messner? Who would be third? Who would be the first to represent their country in this exclusive club? Chamoux was one of the frontrunners, and his drive to finish first among the French was a powerful motivator. But the race for records has a dark side. It creates pressure that can push a climber to take risks that, under normal circumstances, would seem unacceptable. When what is at stake is not just an ascent, but a historic achievement, the line between courage and recklessness becomes dangerously thin. And Kangchenjunga, the third highest mountain in the world, one of the deadliest, was the worst possible place for that kind of mistake. It is also worth remembering that Chamoux had already summited Kangchenjunga once before. That fact may have created a false sense of security. a feeling that he knew this mountain, that it was already conquered, that a second ascent was merely a formality. But mountains are never the same twice. Conditions change, routes change, and the climber himself, after 13 ascents of 8,000ers, is no longer the same person he was 7 years earlier. The cumulative toll of high-altitude mountaineering, a topic that was rarely discussed in those years, but is now recognized as a serious concern. Every stay at extreme altitude inflicts damage on the body. Neurons die, capillaries are damaged, micro-injuries accumulate in the lungs and heart. A climber who has summited 13 8,000ers carries in his body the traces of 13 visits to the death zone. And the 14th visit may be the one the body can no longer withstand. We will never know whether the cumulative effect played a role in Chamoux' death, but we do know that he was 33 years old, an age that seems young, but for an elite high-altitude climber with his track record, it was a body that had already endured extraordinary punishment. After Chamoux' death, his colleagues and friends spoke at length about his character. Everyone noted his determination, bordering on obsession, his smile, which never disappeared even in the harshest conditions, his generosity. He was always ready to help a rope partner, share equipment, offer a word of encouragement. His humility, despite his fame, he remained a simple and approachable person. But they also spoke of his unshakable belief in his own abilities. Chamoux believed he could do anything, that his body, his greatest weapon, would never let him down, that the mountains he knew and loved would never harm him. That belief was his strength, but perhaps also his weakness. Above 8,000 meters, overconfidence can be just as deadly as an avalanche. The body of Benoît Chamoux was never found. Kangchenjunga swallowed him without a trace, the way only the highest mountains in the world can, where snow and ice slowly bury everything that falls within their domain. Over time, his remains will be interred beneath meters upon meters of snow and ice, perhaps hidden from human eyes forever. In a way, he became part of the mountain, the very mountain that brought him fame and took his life. In Chamoux' memory, mountain routes in France have been named after him, memorial plaques have been placed, and annual events are held. His hometown of Annecy honors him as its great son. But perhaps the finest monument to Benoît Chamoux is the influence he had on the development of mountaineering. His fast, minimalist style of climbing anticipated what would later become mainstream. Modern elite climbers, from Ueli Steck to Kilian Jornet, are in many ways following the path that Chamoux blazed. Fast, light, unburdened, pure alpinism in its ultimate expression. His speed record on Kangchenjunga remained a benchmark for those who came after him. 23 hours from base camp to the summit of the third highest mountain in the world. That is an achievement that commands respect even decades later. Even by modern standards, taking into account though advances in equipment and knowledge of high-altitude physiology, that result remains impressive. But Chamoux' legacy is not just records and numbers. It is the questions his story poses to everyone who heads into the mountains. Where is the line between determination and recklessness? When does a dream stop inspiring and start blinding? How do you tell the moment when you need to keep going from the moment when you need to turn back? And is any summit at all, even the 14th out of 14, worth a human life? These questions have no easy answers. Every climber decides for themselves where their limit lies, and every time someone sets out to summit an 8,000er, they consciously accept the risk of not coming back. Benoît Chamoux accepted that risk 13 times, and 13 times he returned. The 14th time, he did not. There is a cruel poetry in how his story ended. The man who was faster than anyone in the mountains stopped forever. The man who conquered 13 of the 14 highest peaks could not overcome the last one. The man who had already stood on the summit of Kangchenjunga could not reach it again. As if the mountain, having allowed him to climb it once, decided there would be no second time. Mountaineering is full of stories like this. Stories of people who were almost at the finish line when fate intervened. But the story of Benoît Chamoux stands apart because his goal was so close and so monumental. One 8,000er, just one. If he had come back from Kangchenjunga on that October day in '95, he would have entered the pantheon of climbing as one of the greatest. He entered it anyway, but as a tragic hero, not a triumphant one. Today, 3 decades after his disappearance, Kangchenjunga still stands, majestic, formidable, indifferent. It does not know that it holds in its snows the remains of a man who loved it more than any other mountain. It does not know that his name is spoken with reverence in climbing camps around the world. To the mountain, he is just another victim, another human body consumed by ice and oblivion. But to us, Benoît Chamoux is more than a victim of the mountain. He is a symbol of the human drive to reach beyond all limits, a reminder that greatness and tragedy often walk hand in hand, and a warning, quiet as the whisper of wind at 8,000 meters, that the mountains never forgive, not even those they once let go. Benoît Chamoux went into the mountains and never came back. He was 33 years old. He had 13 conquered 8,000ers, speed ascent records, and a reputation as one of the strongest climbers of his generation. He was one summit short, one mountain, 300 meters that separated him from immortality, and that became his grave. August 2016, the north face of Ogre 2, Karakoram, Pakistan. 2 figures on a mile-high wall that no one had ever climbed. Scott Adamson and Kyle Dempster, 2 of the strongest alpinists of their generation. A year earlier, this wall had broken Adamson's leg and thrown both of them onto the glacier from 90 meters up. They survived, and they came back. The base camp cook spots them halfway up the wall on August 22nd. Then the storm moves in. 11 days, and when the clouds finally part, there is no one on the wall. What happened at nearly 7,000 meters, no one will ever know. But to understand why Adamson ended up on that wall, you have to go back to a small mining town in Utah, where it all began. In January 1981, in the small town of Price, Utah, Scott Robert Adamson is born. Price is a mining settlement, squeezed between dusty hills and coal pits. There are no climbing clubs here, no mountaineering schools, no tradition of ascents. The nearest serious mountains are far away, and the world of big walls and ice routes feels like something from another planet. But Scott is drawn to rock from childhood. As a teenager, he starts climbing, first on local outcrops, then progressively harder and farther from home. He finds a group of equally obsessed peers, and together they form an unwritten code. Their motto is NWS, no weak shit, no weakness, no compromise. Training to the limit, climbing to failure, living at full throttle. This isn't a club with bylaws and dues. It's a spontaneous brotherhood where everyone pushes the other to get stronger. One of the guys would later win the TV show American Ninja Warrior. Others would start climbing routes rated 514, a grade not every professional masters in an entire career. Still others would establish some of the hardest bouldering problems in Utah. But Scott chooses a different path. Not sport climbing, not bouldering, not competitions. He's captivated by mixed climbing, a hybrid of ice climbing and rock climbing, where crampons and ice tools work on rock, ice, and everything in between. It's a discipline for those willing to freeze, take risks, and solve problems that change with every meter of elevation. By the early 2000s, Adamson becomes one of the strongest mixed climbers in the state. Utah isn't Chamonix or Alaska, but the routes he puts up speak for themselves. A kid from a mining town, with no sponsors and no mentors, is quietly becoming one of the best ice climbers in the country. Few people know it yet. Recognition comes not through competitions, but through routes no one dares repeat. In 2002 and 2003, a quiet revolution takes place in the ice climbing world. Climbers begin ditching leashes on their ice tools. Leashless technique transforms the entire approach to movement on ice and mixed terrain. Hands are freer, moves are quicker, but the cost of a mistake is higher. A small crew from Salt Lake City and Provo, Adamson among them, catches the wave first. They choose the steep limestone of Provo Canyon, nearly vertical walls where ice builds in thin lines between outcrops of rock. Here Adamson begins creating mixed routes that will rank among the hardest in Utah. Many of them remain unrepeated to this day. That's how specific the conditions are and how high the level of climbing. But Provo Canyon is just a training ground for Adamson. His real discovery is ice climbing in Zion National Park. Zion is red sandstone canyons, heat and desert. Ice has no business existing here. But Adamson discovers that during rare winter windows, when temperatures drop below freezing, Icefalls form in the narrow, shaded couloirs of Zion. Fickle, short-lived, unpredictable, but real. Every season is unique. Ice can appear and vanish within a week. The news of world-class routes in a desert canyon stuns the climbing community. It's an oxymoron turned reality. Alongside his work in Utah, Adamson ventures beyond the state. Together with his younger brother Tom, he heads to South America. The brothers tackle snow peaks and ice couloirs in the Andes, building high-altitude experience. Several of their routes are possibly unregistered first ascents. Documentation is minimal. They climb for the process, not for lines and reports. For Scott, it's the first step beyond his home turf, and the horizon starts expanding. South America whets the appetite, but the real test awaits in Asia. In 2005, Scott and Tom Adamson fly to Kyrgyzstan. Their target is Kizil Asker, the southeast face. This isn't just a big mountain. It's a wall that has been repelling the world's strongest teams for decades. Later, this route would be climbed by Inez Papert and Luka Lindick, two alpinists with impeccable reputations. But in 2005, the wall is still unclimbed. The Adamson brothers set up an advanced base camp and start waiting. The weather window doesn't open. Storm follows storm. One cyclonic system leaves, another rolls right in behind it. They sit it out day after day, watching spindrift pour down the wall in white streams. Finally, a window seems to appear, and the brothers begin their ascent. But the wall won't let go. The weather deteriorates again, fast and hard. A constant flow of dry snow floods the route, fills the cracks, buries their gear. Halfway up the wall, they make the call to retreat. This isn't panic, it's calculation. Continuing in these conditions means getting stuck on the wall with no chance of a safe descent. They go down, and over the next 5 days, 3 meters of fresh snow hammers the mountains. All traces of their route disappear. A second attempt is impossible. The season is over. But the mountain takes its toll. Tom gets frostbite. For the younger brother, it's a serious injury that will keep him out of action for a long time. For Scott, it's a lesson no book can teach. Mountains don't bargain. Physical fitness, motivation, and technique can be flawless. But if the weather decides otherwise, a climber has only one right call: turn around. Scott absorbs this principle. He remembers what it's like to stand in the middle of a wall and realize the only way out is down. Whether he truly absorbs the lesson or only thinks he does, time will tell. After Kyrgyzstan, Adamson doesn't retreat. He shifts his sights. In Alaska, in the Ruth Gorge, stands the granite and ice bastion of Moose's Tooth. Its east face is one of the most impressive in North America. 1,500 meters of vertical terrain, where granite alternates with ice and weather windows are measured in hours, not days. Adamson picks a line on it that will become his life's work. The line runs straight up the center of the face, logical, elegant, and unclimbable. Later, it will be named NWS, after the motto of his youth. But the name is still a long way off. In 2008, the first attempt. Retreat. The wall is too hard, conditions too harsh, the timing wrong. In 2010, Adamson returns. 2 more attempts, and retreat again. 3 failures across 2 seasons on the same route. For most climbers, that's a signal. The line doesn't go, time to find another one. Adamson thinks differently. He doesn't abandon the route, doesn't switch to something easier. He waits. 5 years pass between the last failure and the next attempt. 5 years during which he keeps climbing, gaining experience, monitoring conditions on the wall. In April 2013, Adamson returns to Moose's Tooth with a new partner, Pete Tapley. This time, everything clicks. They climb the NWS route in a single continuous push over 34.5 hours, from the lower Bergschrund to the upper one. No sleep stops, with 3 short breaks for tea. 1,400 meters of wall, grade 5, WI6, M5. It's the first free route on the east face of Moose's Tooth. 10 years of obsession end in 34 hours of non-stop climbing. The route that threw Adamson off 3 times finally gives in. 4 days. That's how long Adamson gives himself to recover after the 34-hour push up the Moose's Tooth wall. His muscles haven't fully bounced back, his hands are scraped raw from ice tools, but he's already back at the base of the east face. This time, it's not Tapley beside him, but Chris Wright, an alpinist with whom Adamson will climb several of his strongest routes in the years to come. Their target is the line called Terror, another unclimbed route on the same wall. Terror is longer than NWS, 1,500 meters, and harder, grade 6, WI6, M7, R/X, A2. The letter R means run out, long stretches without reliable protection, where a fall can be fatal. The letter X, the same, but worse. This is climbing at the absolute edge, where every move is calculated and there's no room for error. Wright and Adamson climb Terror, 2 first ascents on one of Alaska's hardest walls in a single week. In the world of big alpinism, that almost never happens. Usually 1 first ascent per season is a success. 1 per expedition is an excellent result. 2 in a week is an anomaly, and Adamson doesn't look like a man at his limit. He's not straining, not grandstanding, not playing to an audience. He just climbs, fast, precise, and efficient. It's this very week in April 2013 that changes the trajectory of his career. Before it, Adamson is one of Utah's strong local climbers, known to a small circle. After it, his name starts showing up in American Alpine Club reports, in articles from industry publications, in conversations among those who follow world alpinism. Alaska becomes a launch pad. Adamson lands on the radar of sponsors and editors, but more importantly, he realizes his level allows him to aim for goals he could previously only dream about. The leap is still ahead. Fall 2013. Adamson and Chris Wright fly to Nepal, not to Everest and not to Annapurna. They're interested in peaks where no one has ever stood. The Rolwalling region, the northwestern corner of the Khumbu area, a rarely visited zone above the Lunik Glacier. Here, far from commercial expeditions and well-worn trails, stand 2 mountains that have never been climbed in a convincing manner. The first is Lunik West, 6,507 meters. On October 22nd and 23rd, Adamson and Wright summit via the southeast face. The route is named Open Fire, 1,000 meters, grade 5, WI5, M3. Deep snow and cold make every step difficult, but the team works in sync. By this point, they've already spent dozens of hours together on Alaskan walls. A week later, the second objective, Pangbuk North, 6,589 meters, the route Purgation, 1,100 meters, grade 6, WI6, plus M6. It's considerably harder than Open Fire. The crux section sits at around 6,200 meters, rotten ice alternating with overhanging, crumbling rock. Wright leads the key pitches, climbing through a zone where every hold threatens to rip out. Technically, a first ascent of Pangbuk North had been claimed in 2009 by an international team led by Swiss climber Stefan Schafter, but imprecise route details and the lack of convincing summit photos cast doubt on that claim. Adamson and Wright believe the summit was not actually reached. Either way, their route up the face is unquestionably new and unquestionably hard. 2 first ascents in the Himalayas in a single autumn season. For a 2-person team working in alpine style without oxygen or porters, it's a result that gets noticed on a global level. Adamson's name now resonates not only in the context of Alaska, but among those who follow the most ambitious projects in high-altitude alpinism. The global climbing community notices Adamson not for individual routes, but as a whole package. In early 2014, the Palais d'Or jury, the premier international award in alpinism, publishes its so-called Super List, a catalog of the planet's most significant ascents from the past year. 4 of Scott Adamson's routes appear on that list: NWS and Terror on Moose's Tooth, Open Fire on Lunig West, Purgation on Pangbuk North. 4 nominations for a single climber in a single calendar season, an exceptional occurrence. The jury, which includes George Lowe, Catherine Destivelle, Denis Urubko, and other legends of world alpinism, evaluates each route on multiple criteria: style of ascent, level of commitment, technical difficulty, and how well the route manages objective hazards. For Adamson, who not long ago was climbing without sponsors and without media attention, this is the moment of transition. He's no longer an unknown guy from Utah. He's one of the most prolific first ascensionists in the world. Alongside the recognition, he continues his work in Alaska. On Idiot Peak, a sub-summit of Mount Huntington, Adamson teams up with Jason Kruk to climb down the rabbit hole. 1,280 meters up the west face, grade 6, WI5 plus M6, A2, another first ascent, another wall that had been considered an unsolved problem. But by 2014, his gaze increasingly turns toward the Karakoram. Alaska and Nepal are serious, but the walls of the Karakoram are a different scale. Here the mountains are higher, the approach is longer, the weather more unpredictable, and rescue in case of an accident nearly impossible. This is where the last great unclimbed walls on the planet stand. This is where walls exist that even the world's strongest teams haven't dared approach. And one of them has been haunting Adamson for a long time. Ogre 2, also known as Günther Messner. 2 is a summit standing at 6,960 meters in Pakistan's Karakoram. The mountain belongs to the Ogre group, a massif notorious among climbers. The original Ogre, Günther Messner, at 7,285 meters, went unclimbed for 24 years after its first ascent in 1977. Its reputation was forged by the legendary epic of Doug Scott and Chris Bonington, one of the most dramatic survival stories in mountaineering history. Ogre 2 stands nearby, slightly lower, but its north face, 1,400 meters of vertical terrain, has never been climbed by anyone. Steep ice alternates with crumbling, unreliable rock. Avalanche danger is constant. Several expeditions attempted to approach the wall, but none got beyond reconnaissance. For Adamson, it's the perfect objective. Unclimbed, technically demanding, requiring exactly the skill set he's been honing his entire career. His partner is Kyle Dempster. Dempster is 33, and by this point, he's one of the strongest alpinists of his generation. A Palme d'Or laureate, one of only 7 people in history to have stood on the summit of Ogre 1. For Dempster, this is already his 6th expedition to Pakistan. He knows the Karakoram like few people on the planet. The team plans the climb in pure alpine style. 2 on the wall, no fixed ropes, no intermediate camps, no supply drops, no support from below, only what they carry on their backs. On July 4th, 2015, Adamson and Dempster arrive at base camp on the Choctaw Glacier. Before them stands a mile of vertical terrain that no climber has ever set foot on. Base camp sits on the moraine at the foot of the glacier, and from here, the wall looks almost monolithic. Gray rock, white streaks of ice, and a constant cloud of spindrift streaming off the ridge. But that's exactly what they've been counting on. On July 18th, 2015, Adamson and Dempster begin the climb. The wall greets them with what they expected: steep ice, unreliable rock, constant spindrift. The pair ascends day by day, alternating leads, screwing in ice screws, and slotting cams into cracks that sometimes crumble at the first touch. Altitude builds, the air thins. Packs grow lighter as food and fuel are used up. But every meter of elevation gain demands more and more effort. At roughly 6,613 meters, about 350 meters below the summit, a fall happens. Adamson comes off. He plummets past the anchor where Dempster is hanging. The fall exceeds 15 meters. The rope catches him, but the impact hits his leg. The result? A fracture. The summit is so close that on a clear day you could see it, but the way up is closed. Adamson can't weight his leg, and every step is agony. The retreat begins. Dempster takes charge of the descent, rappels on whatever gear they have left. Spindrift pours down the wall in rivers of dry snow. They have only 3 cams between them for building anchors, catastrophically few for a mile-high wall. Every rappel is a calculation. Will there be enough gear for the next anchor? Every anchor is a question. Will it hold? Adamson descends on a broken leg. Dempster belays, guides, makes decisions for both of them. The wall doesn't let go easily. Below lies the glacier, still hundreds of meters of descent away over unpredictable terrain. Darkness comes early, the cold intensifies, and every hour of delay narrows the chances of a safe descent. Gear runs out, so does strength, but stopping on the wall means freezing to death. They keep descending, not knowing the worst is still waiting below. During one of the rappels, with both of them hanging on the rope over empty space, the anchor fails. It's a V-thread, an ice bollard made using the Abalakov method, 2 holes drilled into the body of the ice, with a sling threaded through. Under normal conditions, an anchor like this holds several tons of force. But the ice on the north face of Ogre 2 isn't normal ice. It's porous, weakened by frost weathering, riddled with air pockets. The thread rips out. Both figures on the rope simultaneously go into free fall, 90 meters, straight onto the glacier. A fall from that height onto ice is, as a rule, the end. But Adamson and Dempster survive, a miracle that defies rational explanation. Adamson sustains no new injuries beyond his already broken leg. Dempster, just a smashed nose. 90 meters of free fall onto an ice surface, and both are conscious, both able to move. Dempster picks up his partner and drags him off the glacier to a safe point. Step by step, with a shattered leg, across the uneven terrain of the glacier, they make it back to base camp. The expedition is over. The north face of Ogre 2 remains unclimbed. Later, Kyle Dempster will describe the entire story in an article for the American Alpine Club publications. The piece will be titled Near Miss on Ogre 2. In it, Dempster documents every stage: the fall, the fracture, the retreat, the anchor failure, the drop, and the rescue. It's one of the most candid publications in the history of mountaineering literature. Adamson faces a long recovery, a broken leg, an injury that will keep him out of the mountains for months. But the wall won't leave his mind. It stands before his eyes, white, steep, unclimbed, unfinished business you can't turn away from. A year passes, the leg heals, the body recovers. But the question facing Adamson isn't physical. He knows what the north face of Ogre 2 is capable of. He's been on it, fallen off it, dropped off it. He knows what the ice is like at 6,600 meters, how the rock behaves, how spindrift works, how fast conditions go from bearable to lethal. And he decides to go back. Summer 2016, Adamson is preparing for the Karakoram again. Same partner, Kyle Dempster, the man with whom he went through a fall, a fracture, and a 90-meter drop onto a glacier. They trust each other with their lives, not in some abstract sense. They've already tested it. The north face of Ogre 2 is still unclimbed. For both of them, it's unfinished business that won't leave them alone. In the climbing community, the decision raises questions. Going back to a route that nearly killed them both, is that courage or recklessness? Where's the line between determination and obsession? Adamson is no rookie who underestimates danger. He knows exactly what he's risking. But for the Adamson-Dempster team, the logic looks different. They know the wall, they know its weaknesses and their own mistakes. They know exactly where things went wrong last time, and they believe that with this knowledge, they can make it. The plan is the same as a year ago. Pure alpine style, a team of two, no support, no intermediate camps. Just them and the wall. In August 2016, Adamson and Dempster are once again standing at base camp on the Choctaw Glacier. The north face of Ogre 2 towers above them, just as unclimbed as a year ago, just as dangerous, just as magnetic. On August 21st, 2016, Adamson and Dempster leave base camp. The calculation is 5 days, up the north face, summit, descend, via the northeast ridge. They carry minimal gear, a rope, cams, ice screws, fuel, 5 days of food, bivouac equipment. Every gram counts because every extra gram slows movement on the wall. On August 22nd, the Pakistani base camp cook sees the pair on the wall for the last time. Two tiny figures against the gray and white terrain, roughly at the midpoint of the north face. They're moving upward. This is the last confirmed sighting of Scott Adamson and Kyle Dempster, alive. On August 23rd, the third day of the climb, a powerful storm system descends on the Karakoram. Clouds swallow the mountains. Heavy snowfall begins. Temperature plummets. Visibility, 0. It's unknown at what altitude the climbers were when the storm hit. Whether they were still on the wall, whether they were trying to reach the ridge, whether they managed to set up a bivouac, all of this will remain unanswered. The storm doesn't let up. Day after day, clouds hang over the mountains. Snow falls almost continuously. For 11 straight days, the Ogre 2 area remains sealed off from any observation. When the weather finally clears and the north face becomes visible from base camp again, it looks different. A fresh white blanket conceals every detail of the terrain. No tracks, no bivouac sites, no colored specks of gear. The wall is clean, as if no one had ever set foot on it, not a single thread of hope, only white silence. All that remains of two climbers on the wall is the cook's memory of seeing them for the last time against the gray rock. Two dots that were moving upward and never appeared below again. On August 25th, the planned return date for Adamson and Dempster expires. Silence. No signal from the pair, neither by radio nor visually. Alarm spreads instantly. Within days, friends, colleagues, and the climbers' families launch a crowdfunding campaign on GoFundMe. The scale of the response is staggering. In the first 16 hours, $100,000 is raised. By the time the campaign closes, the total reaches nearly $200,000, money for helicopters, logistics, and coordination in one of the most remote regions on the planet. Simultaneously, diplomatic channels activate. The U.S. Embassy and Pakistani authorities get involved. The Pakistani military command authorizes a high-altitude helicopter search operation, a decision that requires political will, because flights at that altitude in that terrain are themselves a risk. On September 3rd, two military helicopters lift off from Skardu. The weather is finally clear. At base camp, Thomas Huber boards, an experienced German alpinist who can assess the route with a professional's eye and guide the pilots on where to search. A methodical flyover begins. The north face, the northeast ridge, the planned descent route, the glacial basin between Ogre 1 and Ogre 2. The helicopters descend to the minimum safe distance from the rock. Nothing. No tent, no pack, no tracks. After refueling, a second flyover, this time of all sides of the mountain and from a greater altitude. The result is the same. Nothing. On September 3rd, 2016, the search operation is officially called off. Scott Adamson, 35 years old, and Kyle Dempster, 33 years old, are declared missing, presumed dead. The mountain gave back neither bodies, nor gear, nor answers. The north face of Ogre 2 remained unclimbed. It stands there still, white, steep, and silent. Somewhere beneath its snows lie two guys from Utah who came here chasing a dream and stayed forever. Imagine spending a night at 8,100 meters. No tent, no sleeping bag, no oxygen. The temperature is minus 50. Wind rips snow dust off the ridge, lashing your face like sandpaper. You sit on a narrow ledge, your back pressed against an icy wall, and the only thing keeping you alive is willpower. Pure, stubborn, inhuman willpower. Your partner will be less fortunate. He will lose every single toe. And those two people you hauled oxygen bottles for through the death zone, they never even tried to help you. Worse, they deliberately made sure you couldn't reach them. And for the next half-century, they will claim you were a thief who stole their oxygen. This is the story of Walter Bonatti, the story of the greatest betrayal in mountaineering history, the story of a man who needed 50 years for the world to learn the truth. 1954. Italy is going through a post-war rebirth. A country shattered by World War II is desperately searching for a reason to feel national pride. And that reason lies thousands of kilometers away, in the Karakoram Mountains, on the border of Pakistan and China. There stands K2, the second highest peak on Earth, 8,611 meters. A mountain climbers call the Savage, for its unpredictable temper and horrific death toll. At that point, no human had ever set foot on K2's summit. Everest had already been conquered. The year before, in '53, Hillary and Tenzing reached the top. Now it was K2's turn, and Italy intended to claim that victory. The Italian K2 expedition was a state-level project. The scale was colossal. The leader, Professor Ardito Desio, a geologist and explorer, a man of iron discipline and a military command style. Desio organized the expedition like a military operation. 11 climbers, about 15 high-altitude Hunza porters from Pakistan, tons of gear and supplies. The budget was enormous for the time. The entire country was watching. Failure was not an option. Among those 11 climbers was 24-year-old Walter Bonatti, the youngest on the team. But even at 24, he was a rising star of Italian mountaineering. Bonatti had started rock climbing as a teenager in the mountains around his hometown of Bergamo. By 20, he had completed ascents that veteran climbers could only dream of. His technique was flawless, his endurance phenomenal, and his determination bordered on obsession. Colleagues said Bonatti climbed as if the mountain had personally challenged him, and he was bound to answer. He was ambitious, young, and burning with fire, and he knew for certain K2 was his chance. But in Desio's expedition, youth and ambition were no advantage. Desio ran the team with a firm, almost authoritarian hand. He assigned roles, distributed tasks, and tolerated no freelancing. The decision about who would go for the summit was made personally by the leader. Bonatti was a brilliant climber, but he was too young, too independent, too much of an individual for a team that valued obedience. Desio sensed this, and for the summit pair, the two who would go for the top, he did not choose Bonatti. The summit pair was Achille Compagnoni and Lino Laccadelli, both seasoned climbers, reliable, proven. Compagnoni was the senior at 39, a mountain guide from Val Tournenche, with vast high-altitude experience. Laccadelli was 28, a climber from Cortina d'Ampezzo, technically skilled and cool-headed. They were to ascend from Camp 9 to the summit of K2 and write their names into history. But to do that, they needed oxygen. The oxygen bottles weighed like cast iron, and carrying them to 8,000 meters was a job for the strongest. That job was given to Bonatti. The plan was simple. Bonatti, together with Pakistani high-altitude porter Amir Mahdi, was to deliver the oxygen bottles from Camp 8 to Camp 9, the last camp before the summit push. Camp 9 was positioned at roughly 8,050 meters, on a relatively gentle section of the Abruzzi Ridge. Compagnoni and Laccadelli were supposed to be there already, waiting for the bottles, ready to spend the night and head for the summit in the morning. A straightforward, logical plan. But what happened next changed the lives of everyone involved. Forever. On July 30th, 1954, Bonatti and Amir Mahdi began their ascent with the oxygen bottles. Each bottle weighed about 18 kilograms. At that altitude, every step is an ordeal. The air holds only a third of the oxygen found at sea level. Your lungs burn. Your heart pounds as if it's about to burst out of your chest. Your muscles refuse to work, and you are carrying extra kilograms of steel and compressed gas on your back. Bonatti and Mahdi climbed slowly but steadily. They knew the success of the entire expedition depended on them. By evening, they approached the spot where Camp 9 should have been. Bonatti scanned for the tent, looked for a flame, a light, any sign that Compagnoni and Laccadelli were there. But there was nothing. The camp was gone. Bonatti climbed higher, still higher. No camp. He shouted into the darkening sky, calling them by name. And finally he heard a reply, from somewhere above, far higher than the agreed location. Compagnoni's voice drifted down from around 8,100 meters, perhaps even higher. The camp had been moved. Compagnoni and Laccadelli had pitched their tent much higher than the position they had all agreed on. Bonatti could not believe it. He shouted, begged them to wait, said he was coming up. But Compagnoni yelled back from above, "Don't come up. Leave the bottles and go down. Leave the bottles and get out. Just drop the oxygen and go back down. But go down. Where?" It was already getting dark. The temperature was plummeting. Between Bonatti and the lower camp lay hours of descent along a dangerous ridge in total darkness. That would be suicide. Bonatti realized they were trapped. Later, analyzing the events of that night again and again over the course of decades, Bonatti would reach a conclusion that would reshape the entire narrative of this ascent. Compagnoni and Laccadelli had moved the camp on purpose. They deliberately pitched their tent above the agreed location, so that Bonatti, young, strong, ambitious Bonatti, could not reach them. So he could not climb up to Camp 9, spend the night with them, and in the morning stake a claim to join the summit push. They wanted the glory all to themselves, two on top and no one else. And for that, they were willing to leave Bonatti and Mahdi to die. It sounds unbelievable. It sounds like the script of a bad movie. But it actually happened, at 8,000 meters in the death zone, where every decision can be your last. Compagnoni and Laccadelli knew Bonatti was carrying their oxygen. They knew he had been climbing toward them all day with those brutally heavy bottles, and they consciously did everything to make sure he wouldn't make it. They were willing to risk 2 lives just so they wouldn't have to share the summit. And so, that night began, the night that would go down in mountaineering history as one of the most harrowing open bivouacs the sport has ever known. July 30th to 31st, 1954. Altitude, roughly 8,100 meters. Walter Bonatti, 24 years old, and Amir Mahdi, a Pakistani high-altitude porter, alone on an exposed ridge of K2. They had no tent, no sleeping bags, no oxygen. The bottles were meant for the summit pair, and Bonatti had no right to use them. No hot drinks, no food. Just them, the wind, and the night. The temperature dropped below minus 50 degrees. The wind blew with such force that standing was impossible. Bonatti found a small rocky outcrop, a tiny ledge where he could sit with his back against the wall. He sat Mahdi beside him, tried to shield him from the wind with his own body. Mahdi was in far worse shape. He was not accustomed to such extreme situations, had no experience surviving on an exposed ridge in the death zone. His feet, in lightweight boots, not insulated high-altitude ones, just the ones issued to porters, were frozen through. Bonatti did not sleep for a single minute. He knew to fall asleep meant to die. He moved his arms and legs, wiggled his fingers, slapped his thighs, did everything to keep his blood circulating. He talked to Mahdi, shook him, kept him from slipping away. The hours dragged like centuries. Every minute was a battle against cold that penetrated to the bone, against wind that stripped away the last warmth, against despair whispering, "Give up, lie down, close your eyes." But Bonatti would not give in. It was not in his nature. Later he would write in his book that during that night he was not thinking about death. He was thinking about injustice, about having been betrayed, about the fact that the people he had risked his life for had left him to die, and that anger, that resentment, that sense of monstrous injustice, that was what kept him from freezing. Hatred kept him warmer than any sleeping bag could have. When dawn finally broke on July 31st, Bonatti and Mahdi were alive, but Mahdi barely. His feet had turned into blocks of ice. He could not feel his toes. He could not walk. Bonatti helped him stand, left the oxygen bottles in place, where Campagnoni and Lassadelli could pick them up, and began the descent. He practically dragged Mahdi down, supporting him, securing him at every step. The descent took several agonizing hours. By the time they finally reached the lower camp, Mahdi was in critical condition. Later, doctors would amputate every single toe from both of Amir Mahdi's feet. All of them. 4th-degree frostbite. Irreversible damage. Mahdi, the man who had carried oxygen for someone else's glory, paid for it with his feet. He returned to his village with a severe disability. He received no glory, no money, no gratitude. His name was barely mentioned in the expedition's official report. The tragedy of Amir Mahdi is a story in itself, full of bitterness and injustice, one that too often remains in the shadow of the dispute between European climbers. That morning of July 31st, while Bonatti was dragging Mahdi down, Campagnoni and Lassadelli picked up the oxygen bottles that had been left behind and headed for the summit. The oxygen that Bonatti and Mahdi had delivered at the cost of unimaginable suffering worked. The bottles had not frozen overnight, the valves opened, gas flowed into the masks. Campagnoni and Lassadelli climbed all day, and by 6 in the evening on July 31st, 1954, they stood on the summit of K2. The second highest mountain in the world had been conquered. Italy erupted in celebration. The news swept around the globe. Campagnoni and Lassadelli were national heroes. They were welcomed home as conquerors. The press overflowed with euphoria. The government awarded them honors. Ardito Desio was hailed as a brilliant organizer. All of Italy celebrated. It was a triumph of the nation, a triumph of the Italian spirit, a triumph of will and courage. But behind the curtain of that triumph, something else was taking shape. The lies had begun. The official expedition report, written under Desio's supervision, painted a smooth, heroic picture. Everyone worked in perfect coordination. Everyone did their duty. Everyone was a hero. But when it came to the bivouac of Bonatti and Mahdi, the report grew vague. Details were omitted. And then came the version that would hurt Bonatti more than that night at 8,000 meters ever had. Campagnoni claimed Bonatti used the oxygen. That night, on the bivouac, Bonatti allegedly opened the bottles and breathed the oxygen meant for the summit pair. That was why, Campagnoni insisted, the bottles were not fully charged in the morning. Bonatti had consumed some of the oxygen. The accusation was a knife in the back. Bonatti had not used the oxygen. He had spent that night without any protection, without the slightest help, and now he was being accused of theft. Worse, the accusation sounded logical to anyone who had not been on the mountain. After all, if the bottles were not full in the morning, someone must have used them, right? Compagnoni and Lacedelli were up above, so it must have been Bonatti. It all adds up, except it was a lie. Bonatti knew the bottles had lost pressure from the cold. At that altitude, at those temperatures, valves can leak. Pressure in the bottles drops naturally. This is a technical fact any specialist can confirm. But who needs technical facts when there is a neat heroic story with a convenient villain? Compagnoni, the hero, the conqueror of K2. Bonatti, the young upstart who tried to steal someone else's glory and someone else's oxygen. The public chose Compagnoni's version. It was simpler. It was more convenient. It didn't require uncomfortable questions, but uncomfortable questions were there. Why was Camp 9 moved higher? Why didn't Compagnoni and Lacedelli descend to meet Bonatti and Mahdi when they heard their cries? Why didn't they at least toss down a rope, a sleeping bag, anything? Why did they shout, "Go back down," into the darkness, knowing that a night descent meant death? Nobody asked these questions. Because Italy was celebrating, and you don't spoil a party. Bonatti tried to tell the truth. He shared his version of events, but his voice was drowned out by the chorus of celebration. Decio backed Compagnoni. The expedition leader could not allow a scandal to tarnish his triumph. The Italian Alpine Club, CAI, looked the other way. The press had no interest in a complicated truth when a simple lie would do. Bonatti found himself alone against the system, alone against a collective lie, alone against people who preferred a beautiful myth to an unpleasant reality. And this is where the second part of Bonatti's story begins. A part that is perhaps even more astonishing than that night on K2. Because Bonatti did not break. He did not accept it. He did not go quiet. He launched a fight that would last half a century. But first, he did something else. He became one of the greatest mountaineers in history. The betrayal on K2 did not kill his passion for the mountains. It transformed it. Bonatti decided he would never again depend on other people. Never again find himself in a situation where his fate lay in the hands of those who could betray him. He became a solo climber, and alone, he accomplished what no one before him had managed. In 1955, just 1 year after K2, Bonatti solo climbed the southwest pillar of the Petit Dru, a granite wall in the Mont Blanc Massif that was considered impassable. 6 days on a sheer face, alone, without a partner for protection, with minimal gear. The ascent shook the climbing world. Bonatti's route on the Petit Dru became the gold standard of solo mountaineering, boldness, technique, and absolute self-reliance. The world saw that this young Italian was not just a good climber, he was a genius. And then came more. Bonatti pulled off one extraordinary ascent after another. Winter first ascents in the Alps. New routes on walls deemed impossible. Expeditions to Patagonia, the Himalayas, the Karakoram. Every time, at the limit, every time, in a style that allowed no compromise. Bonatti did not just climb mountains. He did it beautifully, elegantly, with a purity of style that became his signature. He was proving to the world and to himself, I am not who they are trying to make me out to be. I am a mountaineer, the likes of which the world has never seen. In 1965, Bonatti completed one of the most remarkable solo ascents of the 20th century, a winter solo of the north face of the Matterhorn by a new route. The Matterhorn, a symbol of the Alps, its north face, one of the 6 great north faces, a test for the best of the best. Bonatti climbed it alone, in winter, by a route that had never existed before. It was his farewell to extreme mountaineering. After the Matterhorn, he announced he was done with serious climbing. He was 34 years old. He walked away at his peak, undefeated, with a track record few could ever match. But the K2 story would not let him go. Compagnoni's lie lived on. The official version, Bonatti used the oxygen, was repeated in books, articles, documentaries. Every time the 54 expedition came up, Bonatti was portrayed as, if not a villain, then a dubious figure, a man who tried to steal someone else's glory, a man who used someone else's oxygen. That lie ate away at him from the inside, like acid. Bonatti began to write. In 1961, his first book came out, My Mountains. In it, he described in detail the events of that night on K2. He laid out his version. He presented facts, dates, specifics. He explained why he could not have used the oxygen. He had no mask, no regulator. The bottles were hermetically sealed and intended exclusively for the summit pair. He described how Compagnoni yelled from above for them to go back down, how they spent the night on an exposed ridge, how he saved Monty. The book created a stir, but did not tip the scales. Compagnoni and his supporters held their ground. Desio defended the official version until his dying day. CAI refused to revisit the expedition's findings. Journalists who had written about the heroic ascent did not want to admit they had been wrong. The lie had armored itself with time and authority. The longer it existed, the harder it became to disprove. Bonatti would not give up. He kept publishing articles, giving interviews, gathering evidence. He analyzed photographs taken on the mountain and discovered that some had been doctored or incorrectly captioned. He found contradictions in Compagnoni's statements. The man kept tripping over details, changing his story from one interview to the next. Bonatti cross-referenced facts with the precision of an investigator, conducting his own inquiry like a detective unraveling a crime. Only this crime had been committed not in a dark alley, but at 8,000 meters. In 1964, Bonatti sued a journalist who had repeated the oxygen accusation in an article. Bonatti won the case. It was a small victory. The court ruled that the accusation had no evidence to support it, but it was a victory in court, not in the court of public opinion. The oxygen myth lived on. Years passed, decades. Bonatti became a traveler, a journalist, a photographer. He worked for the magazine Epoca, traveled the entire world, visited the most remote corners of the planet. He found a new life after mountaineering, a new purpose, a new passion. But K2 would not let go. Every time someone mentioned the 54 expedition, the wound reopened. Bonatti continued publishing articles and giving interviews, painstakingly assembling evidence piece by piece. But the official position of CAI remained unchanged. The 90s brought change. The old generation of climbers was fading away, replaced by new people with no obligations to Compagnoni or Desio. Young researchers began rereading the expedition's materials, cross-referencing testimonies, conducting their own investigations. And the deeper they dug, the more obvious it became. Bonatti had been telling the truth. All along, for decades, he had been telling the truth. The turning point was the research of journalist and mountaineering historian Robert Marshall, who in 2001 published a detailed analysis of the events on K2 in '54. Marshall gained access to previously unpublished materials, participants' diaries, photographs, official correspondence. His conclusions were unequivocal. The camp had been moved deliberately. Bonatti had not used the oxygen, and the official version contained numerous distortions and outright lies. Marshall's work became the tipping point. In 2003, Bonatti himself published a book devoted entirely to this story, K2, The Truth. In it, he systematized every contradiction in the official version, every inconsistency, every false claim. The book became the definitive document of a half-century fight for justice. Under the weight of evidence, CAI, the Italian Alpine Club, finally began its review. In 2004, exactly 50 years after the expedition, CAI published its official finding. Walter Bonatti did not use the oxygen. Camp 9 had been moved without his knowledge or agreement. Bonatti and Mahdi had been forced to spend the night on an exposed ridge without any protection whatsoever. Bonatti's actions were heroic, and the accusations against him were groundless. 50 years. Half a century of fighting. Half a century during which one man stood against the system and said, "You are lying. I know the truth, and I will not be silenced." 50 years during which his reputation was tarnished, his name smeared, his feet distorted. And finally, recognition. When Bonatti learned of the CAI decision, he was 74 years old. Journalists asked him what he felt. He replied, "I don't feel joy, I feel relief. The truth is finally free." Not joy, relief. Because for a man who spent half his life fighting for justice, victory is not cause for celebration. It is the end of torture. By that time, Compagnoni was already a very old man. Lacidelli, the only one of the summit pair who, in later interviews, began to acknowledge that Bonatti's version was closer to the truth. Toward the end of his life, Lacidelli effectively confirmed that the camp had been moved and that Bonatti had not used the oxygen. That admission did not come easily. 50 years of lies cannot be erased by a single interview, but at least he tried. Decio died in 2001, never having acknowledged his errors. Compagnoni died in 2009, defending his version to the end. Amir Mahdi, the most tragic figure in this story, spent the rest of his life in Pakistan, without toes, almost forgotten by the world. His suffering was a tool in someone else's game, and none of the players in this drama ever apologized to him. And Bonatti? Bonatti spent his final years peacefully in his home in Lecco, with a view of the mountains that had been his life's work. He received numerous awards and honors. In 2009, the prestigious French Piolet d'Or Lifetime Achievement Award was given to him as one of the greatest mountaineers of all time. The world had finally recognized what Bonatti had always known. He was right. He was the hero. And he was never a thief. On September 13, 2011, Walter Bonatti passed away in Rome at the age of 81. He died of natural causes, not on a mountain, not from frostbite, not in an avalanche. He died in his bed, at peace with himself. The man who survived a night at 8,000 meters without a tent or oxygen, who fought lies for half a century and won, who solo climbed routes deemed impossible. This man departed quietly, like a candle flickering out at dawn. The story of Walter Bonatti is not just a story about mountaineering. It is a story about what happens when ambition defeats decency, when fame becomes more important than truth, when people are willing to condemn another person to death or to half a century of disgrace for a few hours on a summit. Compagnoni and Lacidelli reached the top of K2, but they paid a price that cannot be measured in meters of altitude. They became the first Italians on the world's second highest peak, and at the same time became symbols of one of the most shameful episodes in mountaineering history. And Bonatti became a symbol of something else: resilience, stubborn, unbending, almost irrational belief that truth matters more than convenience, that justice is not an abstract concept, but something worth fighting for your entire life. That one person, if he is right and if he refuses to give up, can defeat an entire system. 50 years is a very long time. It is a whole lifetime. Bonatti could have forgotten, could have accepted it, could have said, "What difference does it make? It was so long ago." But he did not forget, did not accept it, did not go silent. Because for him, this was never just a story about oxygen bottles. It was a story about who he was, about his honor, about his truth, and he was not about to surrender that to anyone. Whenever it seems that fighting is pointless, that nobody cares about the truth, that the system is stronger than one person, remember Walter Bonatti. Remember that night at 8,000 meters. Remember 50 years of struggle. And remember how it ended. The truth won. It always does. Sometimes it just takes a little more time.